Today we're looking at some NHL trade rumors involving some pretty interesting names. Guys like Evgeni Kuznetsov of the Washington Capitals could find himself on the move. Even Sergei Bobrovsky and the Panthers, could they look to move him this offseason? And Milan Lucic is waived as no move clause for the expansion draft. And we have a suspension update for Pavel Buchnevich. We'll jump into the latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have some NHL trade rumors I want to take a look at tonight. Before we jump into that though, I just want to take a second and update you all on the situation we discussed earlier involving the New York Rangers and the Pavel Buchnevich situation. The NHL player safety has suspended Buchnevich for one game for that cross-check to the face of Anthony Mantha. As I discussed earlier, it seems kind of ironic here and kind of odd here that the Rangers are getting all the disciplinary action between the team fine they were given and now Buchnevich and Wilson got a slap on the wrist. And as I said before, I really think a lot of this is a rule issue more than it is the person heading player safety. They can only do what they can within the guidelines and the rules that the league has. And I think that to me is the bigger problem here. The sad part of all this too as well is that Buchnevich, I can't remember the exact amount, but a 1 game suspension for him means he loses, I think it's like $27,000 or $28,000. So he loses, like more than 5 times the amount of money that Tom Wilson will. And he gets to sit out a game. So it's kind of not a great system. So clearly I don't agree with the whole way the Wilson situation was handled. I do think Buchnevich did deserve a 1 game suspension, but you know what? At the same time, he was clearly frustrated after everything that happened with Wilson the game before. And in his defense, Anthony Mantha was really egging him on. Like he had been around him, chasing him around all over the ice, and he was kept tapping him on the back of the legs like he was kind of asking for it. I mean, I don't condone what he did, but just like what people are saying about Panarin jumping on Wilson, you got to be careful with what you get. It's no different here. If you want to take that approach with Panarin and Wilson, it's the same approach with Mantha and Buchnevich here, in my opinion. I mean, Mantha egged him on, and knew after everything he's been through, like I'm sure he hit his boiling point and just lost it and cross-checked him in the face. So as much as it's against the rules, he deserves a suspension. But I understand where it's coming from, and it just boiled over. So we'll see what happens here with this moving forward. Hopefully it's kind of put to bed, and all the teams here can move on. But Buchnevich is out for 1 game. Now, as I mentioned, I want to look at some trade talk around some other teams as well as Milan Lucic. And let's start with him. We got confirmation here that Calgary Flames forward Milan Lucic has indeed waived his no-move clause for expansion draft purposes only. So he still has the clause in his contract. When he was traded, actually, from the Oilers to the Flames, when that deal went down to Lucic-James Neal deal, that was something that was apparently discussed. It just wasn't made public at the time. So clearly Lucic's contract is something that the Flames were willing to take under those conditions they worked out with the Oilers. But of course they were worried that they would lose another player because they had to protect him in the expansion draft. So that was all worked out ahead of time. So that means that they won't have to protect him. So he's able to go to Seattle. So could Lucic end up being a Seattle Kraken? It's a possibility. They may not be real fond of his remaining term in his contract, but he's carved out a decent role in Calgary. Certainly fair to say, I think, that it's worked out better for him in Calgary than it did in Edmonton. He also get a different role, different team. It just seems to be a better fit for him. He's certainly not really earning the total dollar figure, by putting up the offense that normally comes with that kind of contract, but he's carved out, like I said, a spot for himself. So that's good news for the Flames, that they won't have to protect him, and that they won't have to risk losing a guy like maybe a Mangiapane or a Dubé, somebody who would kind of be in that category of, do we protect him, do we not, because we have to protect Lucic, and they don't have to worry about that. So if they go 7-4, if they go 7 forwards in 3D, which you would think, they could end up exposing a guy like Mark Giordano as the captain, because you would think that they're going to want to protect Hanifin, Rasmus Andersson, as well as Chris Tanev, who they just signed on a longer-term deal, where Giordano only has 1 more year left at a pretty good price tag, and that might not be attractive to the Kraken, but it might be. If they want a good leader for 1 year short-term, you never know. Maybe they'll take Giordano. That's a real possibility. Like I've done that in expansion draft, like mock drafts I've done. I've had Giordano being the selection, and that could end up being the case. So we'll see what happens. Obviously, in the forward group, you have guys like Monahan, Gaudreau, Michael Backlund would be a guy who they could be at risk to lose too, because I would think they'd want to protect guys like Dubé and Mangiapane over Backlund just because they're so much younger. But Backlund's an important player to them too. So I fully suspect, though, that the Calgary Flames will be making some additional moves ahead of the expansion draft, because I think they're a team that's going to be looking for change, and they may have a different mix of players to be considered for protection anyway. But either way, Lucic here is waived at. Now, if they approach him about waiving it for any other purposes, they may not get that easygoing guy that was willing to waive. So we'll see what happens, but it's good news here for the Flames. Now, talking about a couple other big names who could find themselves traded here, let's start with Sergei Bobrovsky. Now, the Florida Panthers have themselves a three-headed goalie situation, which is a good problem to have, especially going into the playoffs after having a real solid regular season. Of course, Bobrovsky hasn't had the greatest year. He had a lot of playing time given to Chris Driedger because of Bobrovsky's lack of success, we could say. Driedger kind of took the ball and ran with it for quite a while. Of course, then they get Spencer Knight coming out of college, who's clearly the goalie of the future. But I think they're probably having a lot of buyer's remorse here, regrets signing Bobrovsky to that long-term contract. And I've seen reports out there that this offseason, the Panthers very well might consider trying to trade Bobrovsky and keeping Chris Driedger. Many feel Driedger's all but gone just because they're not going to keep Bobrovsky, Driedger, and Knight. That's just a little crazy. There'll be a lot of money tied up in goaltending because Driedger's in for a pretty decent raise. Many feel he'd be a good option for Seattle, but he is a pending unrestricted free agent, so it complicates things here. Do they let him walk for nothing? Do they sign him but make him exposed to Seattle? Or do they move the big contract of Bobrovsky? Now, I'll caution you, even if they want to do this, it's going to be damn near impossible. So I've seen reports that it's something they're expected to explore, but I just don't see how it's going to happen. What team out there is going to take on the contract of Sergei Bobrovsky at $10 million with a lot of term? He's got 5 years left. He's on a 7-year deal as a free agent. He's in year number 2. And he also has no move, so he has to approve it. He clearly wanted to go to Florida. There was a lot of talk about him and Panarin, and they had specific destinations they wanted to go to when they were leaving Columbus. It sounded like, living in Florida and everything that came with it was attractive to him. I don't see him wanting to go anywhere. So ultimately, he has all the control here. So even if the Panthers want to move him, they'd have to retain salary. It could get real messy and complicated. And I just don't know how that's going to happen. So personally, he could be a $10 million backup goalie here in the near future. And they could run with Spencer Knight and Sergei Bobrovsky. And they may lose out on Chris Driedger. I don't just see any way around it. I mean, Driedger's had enough success that he's going to want, I don't know what he's going to want for a contract, but it's definitely going to be more than $1 million, that's for sure. And it just doesn't make sense for them to keep 3 goalies like that under contract. Now, could they sign Driedger, and give him the promise that we'll do the best to get you as much playing? It's possible, but I mean, we don't know if we're going to have taxi squads next year. I'd say probably not. The league's hoping to get back to normal. So, it's a sticky situation. So as much as they might want to move Bob, I just don't see a situation how they could do it and who would take him on, because it's a lot of money, it's a lot of term, and he's got full control. So we'll see what happens, but can't see it going anywhere. Now, in regards to Evgeni Kuznetsov, though, that's a whole different story. We have reports from TSN Insider Trading that the Capitals are expected to explore moving their top center this offseason, mainly due to the fact that they're just kind of getting tired of the antics as well as the inconsistent play over the past year or so. Now, Kuznetsov has been a pretty steady performer for the most part, was a huge part of their Stanley Cup championship a couple years back, but he's also had his fair share of controversy and issues. He got in trouble and was suspended with the International Ice Hockey Federation for a situation involving some banned substances. So that got him kicked out of the international events for 4 years. So that didn't go over well. Also, earlier this year, he was one of the 4 players that were involved with, breaking the COVID protocols and ended up getting the team a huge fine. Now he's back on the COVID protocol list here yet again, and some think that, he's just not following protocols exactly the way he's supposed to. Now, I can't say what he's doing and what he's not, but I do get the sentiment and understand here that, they just don't want the distraction. And as much as he's a productive player, you have to wonder if it might be best for them to consider moving on. I mean, he's still young enough that he would be attractive to a lot of teams looking for a top 6 center iceman. He's 28 years old. He's got 4 years left on his contract where he's making over $7 million. I mean, it's not a bad contract if you can get the production out of him and keep him, away from those controversies. So, maybe a change of scenery might help him do that. I'm not really sure, but there's certainly no shortage of teams out there that'd be looking for a top 6 center. Like, look to a team like Minnesota, for example, who has bounced back incredibly this year and had a way better year, largely thanks to the emergence of Kaprizov. So imagine you put a nice center like Kuznetsov with him. That could really expand their team. I mean, I know they're looking to move Matt Dumba for a top 6 center. Not sure if Dumba would really be appealing to the Capitals. They have a lot of blue liners in place there already, but still, like, not to say that'd be a perfect trade, but just a good example of where Minnesota would fit in. Maybe there'd be a third team, there'd be a 3-team trade. I don't know. That's just a good example, but and there's other teams too. They're not the only ones. I mean, top 6 centers are hard to come by. They don't often go up available in the trade market. So, like, you could certainly get a good return for him, whether you get another center or you get another top 4 defenseman or you get a combination of younger picks and prospects for the future. I think a lot's going to be determined too by how this team does in the playoffs. I mean, clearly it's going into the playoffs here on, all the whole thing that just happened with Tom Wilson and all that. We'll see how this team does. They're banged up. They have some injuries. After winning the Stanley Cup, if they go a couple of years here, including this year, without much playoff success, maybe the team will decide that it needs more change. I mean, there's also going to end up losing a player to Seattle, which is tough. I know I've seen some expansion draft models out there suggesting that maybe they'll let TJ Oshie go, who's, got connections to Seattle. Maybe he'd want to go there. I don't know. I mean, not to say that they're going to move Oshie. I mean, clearly he's one of their better players and produces a lot of goals for them, so not sure that that's really going to happen. But still, like, the Caps are in a situation where a shakeup could take place if we don't see some, another deep playoff run. And Kuznetsov, based on everything he's been through, it kind of makes sense that he might be the guy that they try to move. They could get a good haul for him, and there certainly would be, I think, a fair bit of teams that are interested, and in the right market, I can see how they'd be comfortable and confident they could keep them on the straight and narrow and get rid of those discrepancies and get rid of those controversies and keep them, producing on the ice. So let me know your thoughts on these potential trades. Give me some landing spots, mock trades down below. Do you think there's any chance the Panthers can move Bobrovsky? I personally don't. As far as Kuznetsov goes, where do you think is a good landing spot and mock trade for him? Look forward to your comments down below, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news from around the entire NHL. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.